I wanted to take you through the whole process that got us to the point where I started the critical path at, because I thought it'd be useful for people to see, like, how do I actually build an image and how do I maybe make a VM out of that image, which is exactly what there's a public lab, which I'm going to base this on, and you're going to see some of the instructions because I have to grab some commands out of the instructions as I pull them out. But there's a public lab where you can go try this on lab.redhat.com. So feel free to check it out if you want to get your hands on this yourself and poke around at image mode. So first of all, we talked about a container file, and I wanted to show you how much we meant that. So there's a container file here, which is going to look very, very similar to how you build a container file for any other container, right? We've got a from line here. In this case, we're basing it on the registry.redhat.io rel 10 rel bootc 10 image. Now, this is where one of those snags that hit me when I was trying to do the CI/CD stuff. If you're building this on a registered rel system, this will work just fine. You'll be able to pull that in. All you have to do is authenticate to the registry. Updates and stuff are going to work because they inherit all that from the host you're building it on, right? So entitlements and whatever. If you're building, in my case, I was building inside of GitLab. My GitLab runner is not a rel system. It is a Podman container that runs UBI. So there's no registration involved. Because it wasn't registered, it couldn't get any updates. So you have to actually like register and subscribe that build host so that it can build so it can inherit that entitlement. So just a thing to keep in mind. You can see here that this is adding in an Etsy directory and putting inside of /Etsy. Now this is like basic configurations that are included in the lab, right? So, but this is an example to show you how easy it is to add in. This is a whole directory structure. And what that'll do is, like I said, it'll merge it with the Etsy directory inside of the image and on the host once it's deployed. And then we're doing a DNF install and we're enabling HTTP. Now, obviously, you can do a lot more. You might notice that we don't have things like the entry point or the CMD that you would normally find at the end of a container file, because this is it's going to build and run a general purpose system. It's a system that runs in it. So you're not going to tell it what to run. You tell systemd what to run. And then the init system will take over when the system boots up for the first time. Similar to that UBI init container that we showed, I don't know, two months ago or whatever. All right, and that's our basic container file. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and build a container from this image. And this is where I'm going to cheat a little bit because the command I need is right there in the instructions. And why not use it? All right, so you can see it running through. This feels a whole lot like a container build. Anyone who's ever built a container, pretty much ever, should recognize what this is doing. All right, you can see there it's running that systemctl command. So it runs Apache, it's at boot. And then it tagged it just like you would any other container. Let me clear the screen here. I wanted to show you a couple of things. Actually, here, let's push it to the container registry because that takes a second. Also got a podman push to run here to do that. And you can see there's a lot of layers here, right? A lot of steps. There's a lot of data that it's pushing up to this registry. So if you're on, a slower connection, this will take a while. This is local within the lab environment, so it's pretty quick. So before we started, I pulled in a rel 10 UBI image, right? And that's right here. And then we just built this new rel bootc image right here. So you can see the size difference. This says rel 10 UBI is 216 meg. Rel, the image that we just built, which is full rel, right? 1.5 gigabytes, right? So you can see where these images are a lot heavier, right? So that is another thing you may want to consider, depending on where you're hosting your registry or how you're hosting it. These are going to be much larger images. So you might want to plan for things like disk storage, or if you're using some third party that charges you based on size or transfer, that's stuff you're going to want to think about before you start pushing bootc images up to your registry. Okay, but the next thing I wanted to do, and I think, let me see if it's in here or if it's on the next step. I think it's on the next step. Just a second here. So we push that up to the registry. Sorry, because the way this lab environment is designed, I had to keep that tab open until I got through those commands. All right, now we're going to actually there's a special container image which will build a virtual disk image out of that container. Now, you don't have to do this if you're not specifically doing what I'm about to do next. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run a local VM on this system inside of libvirt, and that needs a disk image to do it. There's other ways you can deploy these things. I know Scott said at the beginning that you won't be using Kickstart. There's a way to leverage Kickstart to deploy these things, right? So for that initial build, you might do that. You can build an ISO file to install from, or like I said, you can spit out a virtual disk image, and that's exactly what this is doing here. Yeah, this takes a little bit of time because it's basically pulling down that image from the registry, and then it's converting it into an actual virtual machine. Now, in my home lab, one of the reasons I was poking around with the CI/CD stuff, what I have is a script that will run this container. It'll run this conversion container based on the image that's in my local registry. And then it'll deploy me a VM, right? Just by running one single command, right? So I have CI/CD automation that'll build the image, and I can kick that off whenever I want to. Or, you could build up some kind of automation that says run this once a week or run this once a quarter or whatever. And you can have things in there that'll do things like apply operating system updates. But the point is that when I build a new VM now in my home lab, if it's image mode related, it pulls the latest container image from my container registry, builds a virtual disk image out of it, and then stands up a new VM using that virtual disk image. So every time I deploy a new system, it's always based on the latest and greatest image in my registry.
Granite Penguin asked, are there obvious markers inside of a system that would tell you whether it's a Bootc system versus, or image mode system versus a package mode system? So if he was like to have his team look at a system that maybe they're not familiar with, how could they tell whether they need to use DNF update or Bootc to update?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is the Bootc command line tool, right? On a package mode system, it may not even be installed, but if it is installed, you can ask it, are you booted from an image or not? And it'll tell you, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. And I think actually, I forget if it's on this page or not, there was an example of that in this lab.
You're talking about Bootc?
Yeah, there's a section inside of Bootc status that says booted, and it'll say 0 or 1. I forget exactly what the output looks like. We'll look at Bootc status once we get our system up and running, and you'll be able to see that. Okay, so now we have the image kicked out the other side. I think the next thing is to simply copy the image over to the location where images have to live on a libvirt system. Now we're going to run virt install to actually make a VM out of this thing. Like I said, this is specific to this environment. If you're running these things on a cloud provider or something else, then you may not go through these steps. But okay, now we're going to run our VM. And this will actually boot up a VM that's based on that image that we just made. And now at this point, we just have to wait for it to finish booting. It'll be over in this other tab once we get to it.
And so Nate, you actually showed like a combination of two things. One was building the image. And then the other is once you had the image and it was in the repository, you then started doing local hypervisory things to create a virtual machine instance to consume and boot that image, which like that's where you're saying like if you're a cloud provider, you wouldn't do things like a virt install. You would do cloud provider things. Or if you're a VMware person, you would do VMware things.
Or like I said, you could output that to an ISO file. And I think that conversion tool that I just used will do those things for you. I just haven't tried them myself because the thing I cared about was building a virtual disk image, which is exactly what we did there. All right, this thing should be up by now. Let's refresh the screen. Now, when we built it using that container, the image builder container, we had injected some authentication information into, I think using Cloud Init, so that it has a local user inside of the image to start with. There's not going to be one baked in otherwise. So you have to do something to get a user in there. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so here we are. We've got our system up and running. And you can see this particular one is not connected to Insights. but it can be. You can still register these things with Insights. There's tooling that's being integrated into Satellite as well to manage these container images and to manage image mode systems. So you're definitely not left in the dark when it comes to those things. But obviously, the whole mechanism, like everything that you would do to manage an image mode system, in a lot of cases is different. So there's work being done on some of that tooling. All right, so let's clear the screen here, and then let me get okay. So let's see. Remember, we installed Apache during that container file, and we told it to enable it. Now we can see that did work, in fact, right? We have a system up and running, and it has HTTPD up and running, and it did install it and all that stuff. Now we could have gone further to say things like copy in our web tree, or install these dependencies so that we can then pull in our application later using some other automation. That's another question we get a lot. Does this mean that I no longer need Ansible? Because a lot of people would be deploying a clean operating system and then coming back in with Ansible to do all the configuration. Now you can do all that stuff inside of the container file. My answer to that is no. There's still lots of things that you can do to manage your image mode systems using Ansible. So no, you don't have to get rid of Ansible in order to do this.